Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Faith and Family First. I am your host, Eva Andrade. I am here with Marcus Oshiro, and we are going to be looking back at the last week for some very interesting events that have happened right here in the state of Hawaii. So stay tuned, and we will chat about that. Marcus,
Hey, Eva.
how you doing there, my surfer buddy?
Hey, life is good. Been out surfing a little bit, South Shore, but a little bit handicapped with a sore back, so didn't catch this recent swell, but there's always next week.
And you know what? Good thing you're talking about the beach because we're going to be talking about some issues that happened right here in Hawaii's beaches. So make sure that for our listeners and viewers, you stay tuned because we're going to talk about how Marcus keeps himself from drowning in the state of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Which, we're going to talk about that, but it is interesting that even local people sometimes have some issues at the beach. So, the things we're going to talk about today, for those of you that want to just kind of know, and that way, if you want to skip forward, but don't skip forward because Marcus and I, we have good fun chatting. So don't skip forward. But what we're going to talk about the Maui brush fires that recently happened. We're going to talk about the Hawaii tourism downturn because obviously that's a big issue for those of us in Hawaii. And as you know, Marcus and I always connect things to gambling and marijuana. And when the tourism goes down and Hawaii starts losing money, right? They got to look for ways to bring in the kala. We're going to talk about the Pana Eva Zoo admission, which is interesting because they're going to raise fees, and we're going to talk about that. We are going to talk about the most infamous, and it is infamous, the Honolulu rail situation and what's going on with that. And of course, because I work out on the windward side, there's always issues over there that I'm interested with, and that is the Haiku stairs, which has been around for a long time. And man, if we can put some pictures in here as well, we're going to do it because that is some beautiful stuff. And as I alluded to, we're going to talk about some of the recent drownings here in the state of Hawaii and what you can do to keep yourself protected. So, Marcus, let's start with the issue of the Maui brush fires. So, just to give a little bit of a recap for those from the mainland, maybe those that are not paying attention, we're talking about a brush fire that reached up to almost 500 acres. And it triggered like a huge evacuation of like up to 100 homes of people that were very now, luckily, there were no injuries, and there were some emergency proclamations that was done by Sylvia Luke. Highway 31 was closed, but this is an issue that it triggered so many people. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that was the Kahiki Nui fire on Maui. It occurred, I think, on Father's Day, right? It was Sunday, right? So wasn't it Father's Day? They started off in the morning, maybe 9:30, 10, maybe 2 acres. Then by the afternoon, it was like 20 acres. And then later on that late afternoon, it was, several hundred acres. So it burned very quickly, fed by the normal trade winds along that area going up country. So it burns going up the hill. So it burns fast, a lot of fuel because of the dry conditions. So it did trigger a lot of people. And I say trigger, I mean trigger in the sense of about 2 years ago, we're going to talk about it maybe later, but in August of 2023, the great, horrible, terrible fires, Lahaina and upcountry Maui. So a lot of people, I think, were severely alarmed by what happened on Father's Day.
I think people freak out a lot too, and there's so much information out there. I mean, if you took 2 seconds and just went to YouTube and you typed in Lahaina fires, not only are you gonna like see the horrendous damage that was done and the lives that were lost, it was a horrible thing. And I've talked about this before in other shows. My grandparents were born and raised on Maui, up country, and my dad is a Maui boy, and so we spent almost every summer growing up on Maui, and we spent a lot of time in Lahaina. So, it just I remember watching some of the news and I was like horrified. I was absolutely horrified. But not just that, I mean, you can get lost in some bunny trails with some of the controversies, and conspiracy theories that are out there as well about the
Oh, yeah.
Lahaina fires. I won't put you on the spot about that, Marcus, but I'm serious,
Thank
people.
you.
If you have nothing better to do, go look it up because it is very interesting, all that stuff. But our as always, our hearts and prayers go out to anybody who's been dislocated because of the fires. Or luckily, the I believe it's almost out now. If it's not out completely by the time you're listening to this, so that's some good news.
Yeah, and I think they learned a lot from the Lahaina experience, how terrible it was. But I think they were telling people going forward from this point forward, since we're going into the summer months right now, to have a fire plan, emergency plan, and also to have a go bag. A go bag is basically your critical essentials that you need, medication, certain documents, insurance documents, identification documents, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare cards, whatever you should be in one place. So if you need to evacuate on a minute's notice, you have that go bag ready. Some clothes to take with you, the essentials to get out of that place when you need to go. 'Cause I think there are several hundred families that were alerted to evacuate. Most of them were, I think, Hawaiian homesteaders in that area. But I think that's the new normal today, Eva, for all of us to be ready. In the meanwhile, while this fire is going on Maui, up in Schofield Barracks here in Waihawa, Mililani, North Shore area, there is a brush fire burning out of control on the East Range training area, Schofield Barracks. And we watched that from afar, seeing the smoke rise, and it went throughout the day to the evening. But again, that was another fire that was prompted by maybe, well, we don't know, spontaneously broke out. But again, it was a fire here on Oahu, and I think several hundred acres were destroyed.
And talking about fires too, there's no way we could just like pass this over. And recently there was a horrible shooting on the mainland that actually
Oh, yeah.
started by a fire, and it was set. It looks like right now, there might be more information out by the time you're listening to this, but it looks like that the fire was deliberately set to get the firefighters there so that this person could open fire on the first responders. And so,
Yeah.
no, go ahead, Marcus.
No, no, no. I think that's been determined. Today is July 1st, 2025. And I believe the latest reports last night was they have identified the shooter, and they said it was deliberately set by the shooter. They don't know if there's any accomplices with the shooter, but the shooter took his own life. But it was a setup and it was an ambush for those brave firefighters. I think it was in the Coeur d'Alene area, or that area in Idaho, where this tragic event occurred.
And you bring up a really good point. I think that especially because now we're moving into hurricane season, we really do need to be prepared. You just never know, I know that when a hurricane starts coming up, everybody loads up on the toilet paper and the water and they go crazy. But, I think you always need to be prepared. It's crazy to me that people wait until the last minute to be prepared. And it really doesn't, it's not a lot of work to get these things at least a couple of days supply of stuff, ready. And, sometimes people even say to have some clothes packed, in case you ever have to just take off real quick. And maybe we'll do a show one of these days to talk about that, how people of faith need to be prepared, even though we trust in the Lord Jesus and we always know that he's going to hold us, that we're being held in the palm of his hand. We still have to be prepared.
Yes, we do. That's important. And I always have a extra pair of surf shorts, towel, and t-shirt in my car.
You, you know what? I'm starting to do that as well, because sometimes I just need to get away. And so I like to
Yeah.
have a little blanket or towel or whatever. So I could just like go maybe graveyard, visit my brother, whatever, just be prepared. Just be prepared, people. Be
Yeah, extra pair.
prepared.
be prepared. Extra pair of slippers or sneakers or jogging shoes or what have you. Get them, keep them in your car. You know, you're going to use it when you get out there. Who knows, right?
That's right. The Bible says no one knows the day or the hour. So we have to be totally prepared for
Get
whatever
ready with the
comes up.
go bag.
Yes. Okay, so now let's take a few steps back to prior to COVID. Now, prior to COVID, Hawaii had a peak of over 10 million visitors, right? And tourism has always been a big thing here in Hawaii. I remember even back from high school, it was always important that we always took tourism into consideration because that was a big amount of money that was coming into Hawaii's coffers, right? So we wanted to make sure that we were always mindful and respect for the land, but at the same time to always be welcoming for people who were coming from the mainland. But ever since COVID, our tourism has dropped dramatically. I mean, so much so that we have legislators that are thinking that we could have $1.6 billion in lost revenue. And of course, we know what that means, right, Marcus? Whenever there's a revenue drop, then our legislators have to get creative in funding. But I'd love to get, as a legislator of over 20 years, even though you're retired now, and as an attorney who's been involved in a lot of economic discussions, you were also chair of the finance committee that we like to say, yes, 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 we've heard this before, but it all ties into your expertise and your knowledge. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this whole tourism downturn.
Well, tourism is part of the three-legged stool. So tourism is a very important the economy. We also have construction as a essential element of the economy, and also military or federal expenditures in Hawaii. So tourism is a key. I think recent DBED studies show I think 1 in 5 jobs are tied directly or indirectly to tourism. And you can understand why, right? And there's so many components, not only on campus or at the hotels themselves and the people who work there, but also the deliveries that are being made, the intermediaries with the storage facilities, the trucking, the pickup and drop off, and then all the ancillary services regarding, the busing or the transport from the airport all the way to the hotels and then off to the attractions, Polynesian Cultural Center, going out to Kualina for a luau, or several shows here and there throughout Honolulu. So it really touches a lot of people. So when there's a decrease in tourism numbers, and we're seeing that right now, it does have a local effect, quite remarkably, quite quickly.
Well, it's a lot of responsibility on the legislators' shoulders, right? Because they have to balance the environment with tourism and the economy, right? So sometimes you can have this butting of the heads, right, where it comes to money. We want
Yeah,
people to
yeah,
come, right?
right.
But it's not easy for legislators. And I know people, I know that sometimes our legislators drive us crazy with what they're doing at the Capitol. But think about it. There are thousands upon thousands of bills that are introduced every year, and the legislature has to look at these important issues, and then they have to decide which ones they're going to hear, and then
Yeah.
they fight among them, and it's a tough thing. But we got to watch this because, again, when the tourism industry suffers, then our legislature looks to other avenues to bring in revenue. And that's normally when their eyes start looking at things like recreational marijuana and gambling.
Yeah, that's true. I think it looks like a stopgap, a panacea for any kind of revenue loss, but no way right now do we know of any way of replacing that third leg. Well, maybe I can say fourth leg, but third leg being tourism. Maybe the fourth leg might be medical services, because that's a um, economic growing economic factor in Hawaii's economy. But tourism is so important. So even with that newly approved bill, what is it called? The Green
Oh, the
Bill?
green fee, yes.
Yeah, the green fee that the governor has been pursuing since he got elected. Well, he finally got it approved, but it remains to be seen what effect that will have. I think it won't have much of a effect upon people are already booking, already coming to Hawaii. It's going to be, a small percentage of their, overall costs added to the hotel room. And I think it was, what was it? Was it what, 3/4% to the TAT? TAT was at 10%. So it's not, well, it's 1%, right? So it's now 11% on the transit and accommodation tax, hotel room tax. So they said it might be a couple of bucks for a $400 room, for example. So they don't think that's going to really have a negative effect upon those who are coming. But I think the concern that was raised was the imposition of the TAT hotel room tax upon the cruise lines. The cruise lines that are coming to Honolulu, and every one of those cruisers being assessed that TAT for their boarding on a ship that's being docked at the Honolulu harbor, right? Again, it's being docked there. It's not occupying any land or space like a hotel. It's just sitting there at the dock. And there might be some questions, I think, possibly litigation regarding the appropriateness of affecting that particular segment of our tourism economy. In particular, the question of whether or not it's constitutional because it affects interstate commerce, and also the fact that there might be some preemption issues regarding federal legislation, federal law regarding maritime law, which is very specific to what a state can do in these interstate or international borders.
It's interesting that you bring that up because in the Young Brothers and what's happening with them has also been in the news recently. So you're right. It's like all this stuff kind of like interweaves, whether it's interstate shipping or commerce or tourism, all this stuff. It plays a heavy toll on those of us who live here in this beautiful state of Hawaii.
It certainly does. So I think people need to understand that there's more than meets the eye. So if they're interested in this, they should follow up and watch these events going on. I don't know if they've filed a lawsuit yet, the cruise ship industry, but I'm sure they have some concerns. They're doing some analysis. I mean, they're looking at other states that also have them, maybe Florida, Louisiana, California, Washington. They might have these types of fees or assessments tacked on to the cruise ships. But again, the whole idea was, and you started the discussion off with this, was to enhance and protect the environment. And that's the selling point for Hawaii, right? People come to Hawaii because of the environment and the beautiful places they want to go to. We want to make sure that they're protected, they're enhanced, they're perpetuated for, all of us here, the visitors, and for the next generation. So I think the intention of the legislature was well placed. It's just a matter of how do you implement it, how do you make it fair for everyone, and how do you really make sure there's value for those who are paying. As a former finance chair, I know that none of these monies are going to a special account, like a special fund. It's going into the general fund. And thereby, I think we need to watch and have the legislators watch this very carefully because, funds like this, any kind of tax or fees that go into the general fund are fungible. It's just poured into the one pot and then distributed out. So although the intention was to be used for environmental or public safety or fire safety or shoreline restoration protection, because it's in the general fund, it can be used for other purposes.
That is a great segue into, since we're talking about all of these great things that people do when they come to the state, right? Like you said, people come here because of how beautiful Hawaii is, but there's lots of great things people can do here. And one of the things when you go to Hilo, one of the things you want to do is visit the
Oh,
Panaeva Zoo. And so they had some hearings to find out, how the zoo was going to bring in, some economy there in Hilo. And they had hearings, people from the community, they raised their voice. And so what they did is they decided that they were going to raise some of the fees for various reasons, right? And it was interesting. Some of the discussion was, do you get a special fee if you just live on the Big Island, or how about all the other islands? Do they get this special rate? And of course, what about tourists? What are they going to rate? So, but the whole discussion was focusing around animal care and access, and believe it or not, the word that stresses people, equity, right, for families and are for our keiki. So, what's your thoughts on that?
I've always been fascinated by the idea that Paniaba, Hilo side, or the east side of Big Island, Hawaii Island, had a zoo. That's a remarkable feat for the county to have a zoo like that. Of course, we have the Honolulu Zoo, right? Waikiki, right? But few of us know, local people know that on Hawaii Island, Big Island, they have their own zoo. And it's quite remarkable for them to have that zoo. Maui doesn't have a zoo. Kauai doesn't have a zoo. Molokai doesn't have a zoo. Lanai doesn't have a zoo. Of course, Kaho'olawe doesn't have a zoo. But Paneava Zoo in Big Island is remarkable. It's easily accessible by everyone. I think maybe half is locals, half is tourists. It's another attraction. And think about it. You can go to the Paniaba Zoo and see a tiger. I think there's two tigers there, like a Bengal tiger and some kind of white tiger out there. You can see monkeys. You can see some pigs, some other animals like snakes and what do you call it? Dragons. Not dragons.
Yeah, you
Chameleons.
go, everybody go to
Lizard.
Hilo, you can see dragons.
Yeah, yeah, no,
The
that's up
only
on
place in the
the
world where you can see
Yeah, yeah.
dragons.
Well, and I'm getting into
Yeah,
mythology now. I'm talking about
no.
dragons, the
The
great mole or
mo'o,
something,
the
right?
mo'o, right? The great
Right,
mo'o.
right. No, no, no. But they have those kind of creatures there and animals there, and I think it's wonderful for the younger people, especially, to see up close and personal some of these animals and Paniaba Zoo. And I think the amount for the admission is like $4 for a local Hawaii resident. I think you and I, coming from outside, are considered tourists, and we'll pay the tourist, non-resident admission fee. But you know what? I think it's all for a good purpose to sustain that zoo up there. And I think
Right.
for you can get a annual pass like $25.
Yes. Yeah, and we as a faith-based organization, we are encouraging families to do these kind of things, Put down those cell phones, people. Get that cell phone out of your hand and go do something with the keiki, take them to the zoo. I used to love going to the zoo. I mean, after you get past the smell, right? Because all zoos have
Oh
that
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
smell.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But I love to go and see all of the animals that we don't, some of the animals, you wouldn't get to see here in Hawaii. I mean, you walk down the street, you could see mongoose, right? You could see these interesting birds, but if you go to the zoo, you'll get to see things you don't normally get to see. So I am totally encouraging people right now to spend time with your
Yeah.
family, find these ways to go
Yeah,
do this.
yeah, and I'm just looking at the thing right now. I think there is there's a Lala house, the Hawaiian crow, and I think there's Apapane. There's one of the rare endangered species. I think they have a aviary for that, and they also have an exhibit for the alligator. So you might be hearing about a what do you call it, alligator prison in Florida being opened by President Trump and to house certain people that he wants to put there. Um, but you can go actually see an alligator there, I think, up close to it at the Paneava Zoo. But I think it's a great project. I wish the county of Hawaii much success with this. I hope that both locals and visitors enjoy the Paneava Zoo.
Well, yeah, and so along that line, it's the same thing with the Haiku stairs, right? I mean, first of all, again, being
So,
someone who works on the windward side and I go over there quite often, this was those stairs are unbelievable. Like I have never climbed them. Every once in a while when I drive by and I look up and I see because the whole controversy is on whether they're going to be torn down or not, right? And I mean, a lot of people like friends of the Haiku stairs, they're fighting to keep it because this has been a great tourist attraction, for those not faint of heart, right? It's definitely people, it's an unbelievable journey to get, from the bottom to the top of the haiku stairs. And it's just, I know that people were doing, I guess prior to some of this, there was some damage to the stairs. So they did have to do some fixing. And of course, there's always the health concern, right? People who maybe are not healthy enough and they try to go up the stairs and they could have heart breathing issues, maybe get up to the top and they're freaked out, or even the danger, right? That people could like slip on the stairs and fall. And it's quite a distance down, right? So, that's a thing that right now is being discussed as well.
Yeah, I'm going to have to confess because I think the statute of limitations may have already run. But I used to go up there quite frequently back in the early 80s. In fact, I would take my dormitory residence when I was the resident advisor at UH Manoa, living in the round towers, the trash can towers. We would go several times a year to the windward side, Kaneohe Haiku, and then park in a good place to park. We didn't block any driveways. We didn't cut through anyone's private property. We didn't do anything bad to any of the homes there. We quietly went there in the morning and then accessed the naval site, and we would go up to the haiku stairs. I think it was such a wonderful hike for all of us. I recommend wearing some leather gloves or at least some good gloves, good shoes. You can't go barefoot. Don't wear slippers. But it was a great experience going up there. And the views from Haiku Stairs top, they call it stairway to heaven, right? And there's a reason why. I've been up there when the clouds come in and it
It's
blankets you in
beautiful.
fog. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like a religious experience, like being on the top of the mountain and wow, you're so close to heaven and the elements. But I can see the reason why the Friends of Haiku Stairs, want to perpetuate access to it, want to enhance the ability for people to enjoy it. Well, at the same time, I understand the concerns of those who are living nearby, the homeowners, who have everything sunk into their properties and their homes that don't want, tourists tromping through their yards and taking up parking and blocking their driveways and doing all kind of horrible, terrible things that people shouldn't do to each other. So I can understand the other side too, but it is a unique experience for those who haven't been there. And I think the way it's going to go right now, it's probably going to be something that goes into the past, like so many other things that folks like you and I, Eva, the OG,
That's right.
reminisce
That's
about. But it was good back then, but well, we'll see. But I can understand both sides of the discussion.
all right, Marcus, let us continue the discussion that we were having, but I really, 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 really want to talk about the rail.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the rail in these last few minutes. So what's your thoughts on what's going on with the rail? Maybe give everybody a little bit of a synopsis of where we are on the rail.
Well, I was there back in 2005 when the legislature approved the rail project going forward with a assessment on the increase of the general excise tax 0.5% to fund the rail project. I was majority leader at that time, and it was a priority of the majority, the Democrats at that time in 2005. Interestingly, Governor Lingle was the governor at that time, and she had some misgivings about it, but I guess she understood that there was strong support from the legislature to approve it. So we approved it back in 2005. I've always looked at it as being a necessary element to enhance public transportation. When I say public transportation, I mean public transportation for those who do not have an automobile, choose not to have an automobile, cannot afford an automobile, cannot afford insurance for the automobile. But it's truly public transportation. And I look at all the great cities of the world, New York, Boston, Tokyo, Manila, Thailand, wherever you go, Montreal, Toronto, all these great locations, Oregon, California, Washington, I mean, DC, that have these public transportation systems tied to rail. It moves people about, and it makes the economy move and thrive. And areas, I think, for example, like I think Colorado or Chicago, it's to some degree drives development of housing for people. So I'm a strong supporter of that policy that we did back in 2005. That being said, the other side is I'm not happy with the cost overrides. I mean, like overruns,
$9 billion is what the
yes,
legislature
yes,
is saying now, the total cost of the rail. $9 billion.
yes, yeah, and I agree. That's an astronomical amount. I would round it up to 10, $11 billion. Okay, by
Well,
the
yeah,
time,
when all
yeah,
is said, yeah, I
yeah, when
think
it's
you're
going to be
right.
finished. But I think in the long run, when the next generations of people look back, they're going to say it was a wise investment in the basic infrastructure to have this kind of system. I've ridden it one time when it first opened, and I by doing that, I appreciated what it can do for housing, economic development, small business development along the rail route, going out to Kamakana'i, Ali'i, Kapolei, on that side, West Oahu, all the way through, including Ala Moana, and hopefully one day past Ala Moana going east. So I'm bullish about rail. It's already there already. We can't stop it and then create, Hawaii's version of Stonehenge. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
jeez.
I mean, have a Disneyland, Tutti Frutti ride along the route. We can't do that. So it's already there. So let's make the best of it right now. The sunk cost is the sunk cost, and it's almost there. So I'm excited to see the airport section opening up. And here we are in July. Hopefully, we'll see some good news. Here's some good news that by end of this year, if not earlier, the airport section will open up. And I think that's going to be a game changer. Let me tell you why. Once that airport section opens up, neighbor islanders from Hawaii Island, Maui, Kauai, Molokai, Lanai can fly into Honolulu Airport, get on the rail, and head west, and can get all the way out to Kamakani Ali'i. And before that, you can stop at the Kroc Center, and well, Kroc Center right now is the end. Stop at the Kroc Center, get off, and then go. Oh, well, you can actually go to West Oahu. And I think that's going to be a game changer. You can also go and direct route from the airport to Leeward Community College.
And can
So
I just say that now, right? There's two Chick-fil-A's here on Oahu. There's one in town, and then there's one in Kapolei. So, for those
yeah,
of
okay,
people coming from the mainland, right, they can get on the rail and they can get all the way out there and eat Chick-fil-A. For the rest of us, we
that's
got to
right.
drive.
That's right. And for the neighbor island guys, I don't know if there's any Chick-fil-A yet
No,
on
not
Maui.
yet.
Okay,
Not
I
yet.
mean, I mean, they got the kind donuts right out there,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yes.
On Maui,
Yes.
right? But
I
I
know.
realize it's really great. I think, and for example, you can get off at the airport and go and get on the rail, and then go out to Waipahu, get off there at what I call the Highway Inn stop, and get down the stairs and go to Highway Inn and get some of the best Hawaiian food in the state at Highway in Waipahu.
I am not being tongue in cheek about this. When I go to Washington, D.C., a lot of my counterparts, Marcus, they catch they don't call it the rail,
What?
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever it
The
is.
Metro.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the metro. They do that with their luggage and all that. So I know because I've had conversations with people go, who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that. Oh my God. The
there.
metro is huge for people that go to
Eva,
these.
Eva, can you imagine this? Okay, so you got the Japanese tourists coming in. They come in at a weird time in the morning when nothing is open. They can't check into their hotel, so they got like 3, 4, 5 hours to hang out, right? So where they gonna go? They can get on the rail right now. They got their carry-on, like they wheel it inside there and take a tour. an inexpensive tour of the west side, right? Seeing everything. Oh, there's Pearl Harbor is over there,
Hmm.
right? There's some memorials over there. You can see all these things, right? Go out to yeah, Pearl City, right? Why I'll stop over there, go to Shige Simon Stand. I mean, there's things they can do for those several hours. And then go to Highway Inn and finally get out to like Croc Center, right? And then
See,
come back.
what I think people should do, and this is for local people, right? Because you're right. I think it's going to be highly beneficial for tourists, for
Mhm.
sure, right? But
Yeah.
how about local people, right? Oh, local people are not going to ride the ride. Well, here is my call to action for people of faith right here, and see what you think of this idea. I think that prayer groups should get on the rail, and while the rail is moving in the direction, they can use that opportunity to pray for the entire state of Hawaii as they pass over in the rail. Can you imagine if the rail was full of prayer warriors? And because you're going to be blessed by the view, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number two, you're going to be putting money back into the economy. I don't care whether you like the rail or not. The point is it's there, like you
It's
said, and
there.
it's not going to
Yeah.
go anywhere. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that the residents, rather than complain and and just fight the legislature on this, I think what we need to do is bless it. We need to pour blessing. I see your hand raised, or my hand raised.
But that's your
This
hand raised. That's not my hand raised.
that's not my what was okay. You know what? You can put
Maybe
my
that's
hand.
your note taker.
Yeah, no, that's they have this Zoom now has the what do you call that? If they see what
AI.
you're doing. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So they're many. But anyway, yeah, so that's my call to action.
Wow, that's radical. Yeah, I think people should get on it and experience it. You can see the idea of where there can be increased density of building homes, and I talk about it horizontally, not vertically. Horizontal means going up, 3, 4, 5 stories to create affordable, accessible housing for people who are working housing for people along the route. And because you're going to be doing away, for the most part, with your vehicle, that's going to be a savings. For gasoline, that's going to be a savings. For insurance, that's going to be a savings. Because I think much of the modern cities today, you think about it, because you can access your home, your places of recreation, your places of business, commerce, shopping, along much of the rail route as it develops out, and get to work at the same time. I think it's going to be a good investment. And we'll look back 2020 in hindsight and say, wow, those legislators back in 2005, they did some good things. And rail was one of the good things they did. But,
Yep, and I
sure.
know, Marcus, we got people watching right now or listening, and they're irritated and they hate the rail and they hate everything about it. And I think both you and I would agree that there have been problems with the rail. So we're not, saying that it's been a perfect issue,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Far from it. It
Yes.
has not been perfect. There may have been some issues with certain contractors and
Mhm.
so-called change orders that came into effect, and maybe a
And
lack of money.
leadership, right? There's been
And
some
then
leadership
leadership,
issues,
I gotta give it a shout out. I think the current leader, Laurie Kahikina, is doing a good job.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know much about the day-to-day affairs, but in general, I think she's moving the project along. The fact that we can draw down the federal monies, the last portion of federal monies that was given to us or obtained for us by Senator Inouye will be released.
Yeah,
And
so
that,
I want to
yeah.
test you now. You're probably gonna, I don't know, did you track Senate Bill 934 that ended up passing as CD1? This was the one that was relating to an increase in special funds for mass transit.
No, I did not.
That was Dela Cruz's bill.
Okay, Senator De La Cruz is my senator. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically this is the one I know you must be familiar with this. This was a huge controversy because it was his bill, and then all of a sudden he threw money into this bill that was going to force them to build a park and ride facility in Pearl Highlands. And
Oh, yeah.
and they freaked out, not the legislature, but Hart freaked out,
Yeah,
and they
the
were like,
county, yeah.
there's no way we could do this. Now what's interesting is Senator Hanabusa, or she used to be a senator, now she's part of the board,
Chair.
right?
He's a
she
chairperson.
was she was like, okay, this bill is probably not going to pass. So and she's on record saying that, and the bill actually was signed into law. So it's going to be very interesting. So for those of you that are tracking, and Marcus, you can kind of like see if, even though you're not familiar with the bill, I'm sure you're familiar
What's the
with the
bill number again?
conversation. So it's Senate Bill 934, and it passed
Okay.
with a CD1. And basically what it does is it proposes funding to the Mass Transit Special Fund for the fiscal year 25 to 26. Okay. It appropriates 572 um million. No, 70, I was a million. Yeah, 572 million from the Mass Transit Special Fund. Okay. So they're supporting some disbursements. So Park and Ride Facility was one of them, right? So